A very pleasant good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone all over the world and here in our country, whatever your time zone may be outside of the Philippines and wherever you may be located. Welcome to our Chronicles. This is Rita Gadi. Perhaps by now, people around the country and those listening in around the world would know that there is some occurrence here which has actually brought our country to the attention of many intellectuals, many writers, many commentators, many kibitzers. And as they say, nations and peoples are largely the stories that they tell themselves. If they tell stories that are lies, then they will suffer future consequences of those lies. If they tell stories that face their own truth, then they will free their histories from future flowerings. So, where are we at this particular stage? What are the stories we tell to ourselves? What are the stories we tell to the world? I go back to the continent of Africa, where I quite often, I gather their proverbs, many of their sayings, many of the things that have gone through. Ethiopia, for instance, although it does not have a written history, has really some of those outstanding enlightenment that we can get from many of the things that they have done, a high civilization, so to speak. But nonetheless, as I said, I go back to the continent trying to gather some elements of wisdom, some of their sayings, some of their stories. And this is coming from many of their writers too. If you want to know what is happening in an age or in a nation, find out what is happening to the writers. In ancient times, not really very ancient, but a long, long time ago, we had the town criers. There was not the printed newspapers yet or anything that they can read. So you had somebody from the office of the leaders, the dukes, the kings, or whoever was leading that particular community, and they would go into the center of the town and they would make the announcement. They were called the town criers. Like, for instance, in a week's time, you have to pay taxes, and this is how it's going to be, how much it's going to be. Or they will say something like, the king is coming, so you prepare yourselves. Many other announcements that they make, that is where you have what they call the town criers. They are today what we could call perhaps mainstream media, but that's just not all there is to it. You have all of the social networking applications. That's why you have bloggers, vloggers with a V, and several others who just make commentaries and go on air through Facebook, YouTube, and whatever. So, is there any control as far as this is concerned? That is what many countries are trying to do, because many things come out. As a matter of fact, in our Congress today, ongoing, some of our legislators are trying to find out, among many that they have huddled together, who are coming out with all their posts in YouTube, in TikTok, and in the Facebook, and they're trying to sort out or to sieve what is fake, what is misinformation, what do we do. And so one of them even asked, how do you define what is fake? So, but this all boils down to the fact that our writers, I make it as a general term, not just writers, but those our speakers, our talkers, they tell us what is happening actually. There's some kind of a seismograph. Parang nagdi-determine to may earthquake, parang may impending earthquake. So whether whatever they say, or whatever they write about is actually announcing some disaster or something that's going to happen, that's it. We have to decipher whether this is true or false. But they're still considered as seismographs. They calibrate what is impending or what is to happen or what is not actually happening. But however else you would listen to them or read them, that becomes the spirit of our age, the spirit of our times. Advancement in technology has really brought it about in such a manner. So we ask, who are the real writers? In whose name do we consider the stories of our country, the stories of our people, rightfully, factually, and as it is in reality, the truth? So if there are, I don't know if you will use that word legitimate or illegitimate or factual or non-factual or fake, but are the writers actually in their name the seismographs of what is happening in our country? So if they are strangely silent, there is something that is being hidden. When, for instance, they are noisy, then you have to sort out exactly what are they being noisy about. So in many ways, you could say that bloggers, vloggers, all of this coming out in social networking, are they the barometers of our age? Can we gauge the temper of our age through them? It's really very difficult to decipher and to make conclusions. But we have to be, at this particular stage, truly discerning and careful as far as the stories that are being brought about, that are being talked about. Because our people can only be as healthy and as confident as the stories we ourselves tell ourselves. Sick storytellers can make our nation sick. And a sick nation also brings out sick storytellers. It works both ways. So, how do we determine this particular era that we have? That sometimes we cannot really tell whether a story is fake or whether it is simply misinformation. Some time back, there was a writer from Africa who said that we all begin with words and we will end with words. And sometimes, as it is happening today, our days are poisoned with too many words. Words said but are not meant. Words said and meant. Words divorced from feeling. Words that wound. Words that conceal. Words that reduce. There are also dead words. So, it is really difficult to come up with conclusions. So we look into who is the writer, who is the talker, what credibility does that person have? Do we have to gauge that, do some research on it? But we're listening and we're hearing and we're reading. And sometimes, yes, the highest things are also beyond words. But somehow what is happening around us with everybody talking and writing and just crowding social networking and the, as they say, the highways of information technology, we are all wounded in some way or the other. We all carry some kind of an unease, some kind of an unhappiness within us for some reason or the other. And that is why we need a little gentleness at times and a healing from one another. How often have we talked about this? We must heal ourselves first, and then we must heal each other. We must also have healing in words, like friendship. Friendship, which has always been a mystery to many of us. But with a smile, that is the shortest distance between people. And when you smile, there is some kind of an understanding. And I repeat, sometimes the highest things are actually beyond words. And so possibly that is the reason why I'm talking this way, because I've reached a stage where we all have to aspire to the condition of wordlessness. Is it possible? So we have literature, for instance. Literature works on us. It does, in many ways, speak of our dreams, or sometimes they silence our dreams. Literature, as it is, as an art form. So here you have the good words that enter us, so that they become our emotions, they become our moods, they become the quiet fabric of our being. It is like music. Some words, literature as an art, is like music, like painting, like sculpture. Because literature also wants to transcend beyond its just being words into something higher. And that is how art is. Art wants to move into silence, into the emotional and spiritual condition of the world itself. So you have statues that somehow speak of melodies. You have notes that tell us that we can yearn and that we can act. So when things fall into words, and they usually enter into us in such a manner that they could incite us or they can calm us. I speak of this because particularly now that we even have legislators considering calling all of those that they can read and all of those that they know are talking over the different applications of the technology that is available to everyone, and it is free in a way. It is important that we get to understand what are the words that all of this mean. All of the legislators talking, all of these bloggers and vloggers saying. And sometimes it is really important for us to reach that particular stage where before our ideas come to be really pure and something that could be inspiring, something that could be life-giving, some possibilities that are splendid enough to inspire us to be better persons. That is exactly how our words should be. Do we have to return to contemplation to be able to think over, to be able to really meditate on the things that we have to say? Perhaps that is necessary too before our words come out of our mouths, before our words come out in print. And so it goes, as I've always repeated, before anything else, we begin with words, and perhaps that's what's going to happen. We shall end with words. But in a world like ours, it is somehow increasingly drained already of many things that are of value. And that is why we have to go back to the authenticity of what we are, so that we can be able to come out with what is important in life. I've said this a number of times, that the only thing worth living for is love. love in its broadest and in its minutest sense, love for one another, love for ourselves, love of our work, love of our destiny, whatever it may be, love for our difficulties, even love of life, the love that could free us from the mysterious cycles of suffering, even the kind of love that could release us from our self-impressions, from our bitterness, from greed, from madness, from competitiveness, a love that can make us breathe freely again, a love of a great and beautiful cause, of a wonderful vision, in fact, a great love for one another, and also, most importantly, for the future, a kind of love that could reconcile us to ourselves and with each other, to reconcile us with our simple joys and to our undiscovered value. A creative love, a love that is touched by the sublime. I'm actually quoting this from many of the writings that I've gathered. These are notes not originally mine, but belonging, as I said, from the African continent, whose proverbs and writings come out with such richness and such enlightenment. To repeat that sometimes the highest things in life are actually beyond words. So here we are at this stage where you have contending forces, not just in politics, but even within families. We know this, and I do not intend to go into the details and the nuances of conflicts within family members and how they somehow divide peoples in a way, because this involves leaders, involves people in high offices. Either which way, our country has taken sides this way, not only taken sides, but have gone into various debates as far as that is concerned. And so here we are with the question of leaders, legislators, family members, and all of that. Without my making descriptions of all of this, you would know in many ways exactly what I'm talking about. But this is where we have this important admission that power is important, but absolute power destroys, as they say, and destroys quite absolutely. And where does the power lie? It lies within all of us in many ways, but also is exercised by those who sit in the positions of power. So that is what not just confuses, but that is what divides the nation. Power and its legitimacy. But then, of course, we understand that power is actually the product of the participation of the people, our participation. And leadership draws its strength from the people. That is how it goes. Leader and people should be one. But sometimes this is just a ritual. And we have the delegation of authority to leaders that do not deserve to be in those positions. And so you have this different exchanges of the hierarchy of who is more credible or who is to be actually followed. And that is where the danger is, because then we also have that big responsibility to be able to discern for ourselves all of this. So our society should be given enough room to breathe, and we ourselves should be breathing without the influence of factors in politics, but really to understand what are the components actually of our nation to be able to grow? We have to participate. We have to have the initiative. We have to have the responsibility. So here you have the whole problem of national growth, which lies in that balance of the forward motion and the cooperative effort between authority and the individual, between the leadership and the people, between the leadership and those in power and our individual consciences, between what is happening all over the political arena and also in the personification of power. So here we have all of that in our consciousness to be responsible enough to decipher. So then it is important that the relationship between the leaders and the people should have been established, must be established, is established the way it should be, and that is what should not be falsified. Here is where the value of words are most important. So when you speak of the discussions they're having, what is fake, what is misinformation, it all boils down to that as a matter of fact. So again, as I've said, I'm coming in with a lot of notes which I gathered from one of the French writers who wrote about charisma and leadership, the demigods, Jean Lacouture. And he has written extensively about so many of our contemporary and just recent leaders of the third world who have come up with that particular important idea of how personified power is actually coming directly from the people and must be preserved. So that all of those who are in social networking, in media and mainstream or substream or whatever else adjective you would attach to it, would realize that the most important inspiration and the most sublime of it all are the ideas that are coming from within ourselves, a matter of conscience, so to speak. And that is how we have a title, In Whose Name. I should have titled it In Thy Name, because I speak of the highest level of how our thoughts, our minds, our hearts, our words should really come from. We often forget this. How many times I've repeated it in many programs. We should bring God back into our lives. How do we do this? In bits and pieces, in the snippets of the day-to-day work that we do. And if we expand this further for the entire stage, so to speak, the theater of our domestic political life, then that is the mess that we're actually seeing right now. Can we go through this spider web or this web of words that are being exchanged from one to the other, from one family against each other and vice versa, from legislators among themselves, from mayors all the way down to barangays and all of other components that actually come with the management of our lives in government, in private, in the civic world, in everything else that we do on a day-to-day basis. You see how important it is that we are able to elevate all of this beyond ourselves into that realm where we actually belong as human beings. As I've always said, we are created in the image of a God, of God Himself. We should not forget that and go down to the base of what is what we often decry. All of this that's happening, too much greed, too much covetous, and all of this. So I am at a loss for words in many ways as far as that is concerned. So I've said so many times that there are greater possibilities within us that we should actually be doing for ourselves. And so I've come to that point where when I read some of the works of Shakespeare, for instance, I do not want to go with the oratory of Mark Antony and all of those who lamented the killing of Julius Caesar at the time. Not that, anyway. But There was a play written by Shakespeare, which perhaps could be something we could read over and over to find out all of this debate on what is legal, what is what should be done because that is the law, what the courts determine as already a decision, or do we go into the higher level of what is moral, what is a matter of conscience? Where does the spirit belong in all of this? With all of the legalists, as they say, is there still room to find out if there is um, the entrance of the divine? That is why I always say, bring back God into our lives. But should we really? Well, in ancient times, they only had two studies, I think, if you just try to classify it: logic and ethics. Logic is the right thinking. We study this if you take up your basic humanities in philosophy 101 or so. Right thinking. You have the first premise, second premise, then you have the conclusion, or you have a tautology. Proper thinking. And also with logic is the measurement of the way your words ought to be set up in a way. You also have logic as part of the discipline and the harmony and the order of the universe itself. Logic too, in the way music is composed. You have notes that are not syncopated, that they can blend with each other. You have logic too in the study of astronomy and astrology and the positioning of the stars. You have all of that in calculations, in actuarial studies, logic. And then the other study, which was valuable to them, is ethics, moral. What is moral? And we quote many of their statements at the time. It is not enough to just be good. You have to be virtuous. So it's not just a matter of right and wrong. There is the value system behind it all. Virtuous, virtud. See, the grace which comes from the gods of that time. They had so many gods, but all of them would bring down from the gods the qualities that would elevate them higher than just human beings. Virtue is a value, not just right and wrong, but what is virtuous. And that is morality. Some of our ancient laws, as a matter of fact, looked into that. They were moral laws. The first commandments, of course, were all moral commandments. Thou shalt not do this. See? But we have either tempered that along the way, or because history has overcome many of our pronouncements, the Hammurabi Code, the several other Justinian Code, etc., and all of this. But we go back to the tribal ideas that they have as far as justice, as far as law is concerned, and that is where you could find also ethos. What is right and what is wrong, not just what is legal, what the law says. Laws are created by men, but there is such a thing as the divine law and divine justice. So let me go back to, as I was saying, some of the plays of Shakespeare that speak of this. We know about Hamlet. We have read Julius Caesar also. Many of us who've gone through English literature have come across many of this. And also, in many ways, we have quoted some of those lines, everyday language. And of course, when we want to speak of something of importance to us, we get quotations. We recite quotations. We've actually memorized them, to be or not to be. That is the question, and so forth. And is this a dagger I see before me, and so forth. And that perhaps are some quotations that you could even elevate all the way to the International Commission on Human Rights, or the ICC, as you would call it. But here I am with one of the plays of Shakespeare, which I think could be of some value in many ways to our lives today as we look at it and as we read through it. And this is The Merchant of Venice. To those of you who have read it, and to those who have studied it, maybe I could just give a shortcut summary of what it was all about. So here you have the Jew named Shylock, and there you have Antonio, and another character in the play, who borrowed some large amount from the Jew. And so it was a lengthy way of discussing many things that went in between. Well, there was a love story, and of course, there is the conflict of ideas and many things in between, until it came to a point that they finally talked about how this man is going to pay Shylock, the Jew, to whom he owes that large amount of money. So they went to court, and in front of the judge, it was agreed that Shylock said, "Okay, I will forgive all of that, or I will no longer ask for payment in money, but I will ask for a pound of flesh from the man who owes me this much." And so finally, after many things have happened between the two of them, and the intertwining of arguments, and of course, many ideas about how mercenaries could operate, how the mercantile world has overcome many of our transactions with one another, lessons that we can learn even to this day. The way people handle money, the way people use money for themselves, the way people steal money from people with money, and of course, debates going on in Congress and in the courts about a kind of budget that deserves some scrutiny. All of this are actually part of debates on the mercantile world, and that is how that particular play of Shakespeare played around many of this, until finally the day of reckoning came, and the two men faced each other in court. So the Shylock, the Jew, was already with his decision to extract a pound of flesh from the man who owed him that amount of money. And in front of the judge, he said that this was a decision that was actually sanctioned by the judge himself, with some reservations, but since that was what was agreed upon, so the judge said, "Okay, the day of reckoning has come, and so now let's see how it goes." And so Shylock said, "That pound of flesh that I would like to extract from this man who owes me will be the pound of flesh in his heart." So a rather cruel kind of extraction, because that would mean death for the man who owes him. And so again, we can utilize that particular episode, or maybe that kind of a sentencing that the Jew has extracted. In many ways, that's happening today. Now there are issues against those who have been exterminated because they were drug lords, or they were part of the drug trade, the sleazy underworld of trading in illegal drugs. And that is exactly what's happening now, as far as the courts outside of our country are concerned, because that is what they're going to determine whether this man, who is supposed to have exterminated several people because they were suspected to be trading in illegal drugs, would be something that could be sentenced upon at that particular stage in that particular court. In the same manner that as we read The Merchant of Venice, likewise, then you could see how not just cruel it would appear to extract a pound of flesh from the heart of the man who simply owes a lot of money to Shylock, the main character in that particular play. So too, there would be contending forces right now happening before our eyes and before our ears, as we listen to arguments saying that it is cruel to have somebody hide off to a foreign court to just be able to determine whether he too is guilty of the murder of so many. So that is the court of law, and that is why I say, "In whose name?" And so that was the situation in the final day of reckoning. in the same manner that we are also awaiting, or we are in that period of reckoning in many ways, because now we have the relatives of those who have been exterminated by this man that is going to be on trial, if the trial will be pursued in such a manner that you extract a pound of flesh, in fact, for all the flesh that he has exterminated, so to speak, as has been accused by several others. So, as I've said, somehow when you read this plays of Shakespeare, you could feel how it is that situations which happened several centuries ago are also situations that are happening today. As I've said, like, for instance, what happened with the murder of Julius Caesar because he was thought to be over ambitious, you know. So, to decisions on the conflicts within the family and within father and son and within the wife and the husband in Hamlet, for instance, you know, and all of this, and you have also the appearance of the witches at the opening of that particular play, where they were in front of a cauldron mixing their poison, you know, all of this to be able to determine whether there will still be a king, or that the king will be murdered, or that another one who is deserving and not deserving would be in power. So the play of politics, all of this. So I go back to the Merchant of Venice. I'm really veering away from this, to so many things, but it would be good to read all of this. And even the Greek plays, you know, Sophocles, Aeschylus, all of these Greek writers also had a number of scenario, or a dialogue that we could be able to apply to what is happening today. And when things are getting so complicated already on the ground and they could not seem to understand how to settle their problems, then they would call on the gods. And that's where we had that phrase, the Deus ex machina, the God would come down. Well, in the theater at the time, the god would be brought down through some kind of some rope that could bring down the image of that god, that would be able to determine how the problem among the humans could be settled. So it is also that many of us cry out to the heavens for the problems that we have. We rely and trust on the almighty power of the Lord to be able to get us out of difficulties, to settle our problems. And so that's why our title is In Whose Name. So as I've said, in the name of God actually is why we often forget to bring God back into our lives. So let's go to the Merchant of Venice. And so it was, as I've said, the day of reckoning. And you had there face to face Shylock, and of course the man who owed him that much money, and he is now to execute his claim to be paid by a pound of flesh, heavy as it may be. And that is where I would encourage you to read that particular play, because that is where we are as a people watching the drama that is occurring between us. Two families that are already not just widely apart, but are so diametrically opposed to each other, sadly, because there could have been this bond of friendship, not just unity, but just the bond of friendship that could have survived the tempests of the times, and that would have benefited our country in many ways, if only there could not have been this, well, the entrance of so many other factors, one of which is a family affair, a family matter between brother and sister. How many times and how often within our own families we encounter this? Sometimes as close as a brother and a sister, a sister and a sister, a brother and a brother, siblings, as they would say. From their youth, if there had been some sibling rivalry already, and then eventually in their adult years would erupt into such violence in words and in deeds. How often and how many in our lives and in our families we experience this? But here is a situation, a scenario, a drama that is being performed on stage with all the Klieg lights open. It's not just a teleserye, because a teleserye would have an ending. But this is a continuing drama. Interesting, hostile at times, but dividing thought, dividing the mind and the heart of people, of ordinary people like us. A family divided between what we cannot even understand as what could be the cause of it all, when both have the right to speak, whereof they sit in high positions. So what am I leading on to? Family squabbles and misunderstandings among siblings normally don't get to be on the public stage. It's within the home or between relatives. But this is a different scenario altogether, where not just the whole country, not just all Filipinos, but even the world watches, sees, hears, and listens. So that was how it is. And that is why I say, in whose name all of this is happening. If only God were brought back into our lives, then perhaps we could have sublimated all of the anger and all of the conflict and all of the attacking words, words that attack. I mentioned, already read that from the African proverbs, words that wound, words that bleed, words that are dead actually and should not be revived anymore. So here we are at that scenario, going back to the Merchant of Venice, and we have there a lawyer, a lady lawyer, who comes to defend the man from whom a pound of flesh would be extracted by the Jew that actually demanded this in front of a judge that already pronounced agreement with that sentence because it was made before his court. So there you could see the cruelty of courts sometimes when a decision is going to be made, how people are sometimes set out as free because of a technicality, because the search warrant was not there, because the arrest warrant was illegal, and so forth. And that is exactly what's happening now. A question in the kind of search warrant, a question in the kind of being immediately taken out from one's country. So that is exactly how it was with the Merchant of Venice when the that day of reckoning was already at hand. And there you have the lawyer, a female lawyer. She has come out with several other lines in that particular play, many also which could be quoted. But in that particular scene, towards the end of that play, Portia comes out with that um, with that message to the world, in fact. And that is what I'd like to read now. This is coming from Shakespeare's own words. And in many ways, I believe that we should make it apply into our lives, apply to our lives, the way we deal with each other, the way we have it in the highest tribunals, here, wherever, because we are all humans in a way, and so you do not have aliens, even though they're foreigners, in another court. We are all human beings, and so this applies to all of us in that particular level. And this is how Portia came up with her argument. And I quote this directly from Shakespeare. The quality of mercy is not strained. It drops as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him who gives and him who receives, or him that takes. It is the mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. I repeat that. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein does sit the dread and the fear of kings. So there you could see how high and mighty mercy is. See, it becomes the throned monarch better than his crown, better than his scepter, that shows the force and temporal power with the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein does sit the dread and fear of kings. So even with his sword of justice and the sword of his majesty, mercy is still higher than his crown. But mercy is above this sceptered sway. So above the sword of justice, above the power that one holds, it is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. Therefore, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation as we do pray for mercy. And that same prayer teach us all to render the deeds of mercy itself. In whose name? In the name of God himself, indeed. Mercy is highest of them all. So, this applies to all of us. This applies to all of those who wield power. This applies to everyone, because we all have power in many ways than we can even imagine. And that is the stage I would want to present before all of us in that particular manner. And so you see how important it is that, yes, we begin with words and would possibly end with words too. And yes, if we know what is happening to our era, to our nation, to our people, we have to find out what is happening to what we say, to what is happening with our words too. And so here we are, nations and peoples indeed are the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we feed ourselves. These are the stories that if they are lies, then we will suffer those lies. If that's the truth, then we will be free from the histories for future flowerings. So that is the natural justice to the incontrovertible logic of the way stories would reveal their hidden selves. And that is why I speak of mercy, which should not be strained. It should drop like the gentle rain on all. And it is twice blessed from he who gives and he who receives. And so that is how it goes. So let us go then quietly into ourselves in that spirit of contemplation, and also in that power of the truth and the beauty of our consciences, our souls, that will really bring out what is human in all of us. So, Is our life the survival of the fittest? The survival of who is more in power? But there is no such thing as a powerless people. We all hold it in our hands. We have it in our minds. We have it in our words. So it is important that we use that power carefully and with the magnanimity that I've said belongs to the realm of the sublime. Our history will judge us after this era. We are participants to it. And we have to be truly deserving of our nation, of our country, of our flag, of our being a Filipino. There is that sign that is now being plastered on walls, on t-shirts. I am not a Filipino for nothing. Yes, we are not Filipinos for nothing. We are Filipinos for everything that is of value to our lives, and in whose name, except in God's name, must we be able to heal ourselves first as we heal each other. So the quality of mercy is not strained. Let it drop from the heavens as the gentle rain upon the place beneath. Because that is where mercy is above all of the crown itself, above each and every one of us. And so we seek it not just for salvation, as we do pray for it, that it will teach us all the deed of being participants in the sublime, in God's realm indeed. Well, it's Lenten season, and I've talked about the Quadragesima. So too with our Muslim brothers experiencing this period of Ramadan, the period of fasting from many, from not just from food, but fasting from other pleasures of life. In the same manner that our period of Lent is also abstinence and fasting. And this is where we should fast even more seriously, fast from all the things that make us evil, and go back, as I've said, to bringing God back into our lives. And with that, I'd like to thank you all. This is a monologue of this, but actually we have to understand how important it is that our words have to carry what is sublime in us. There are investigations, questions, and all sorts of committee hearings that are being undertaken, all because of the words that some people speak, words that we hear, words that should be said, words that should not be said. But above everything else, it is the word of God that is of most importance to all of us. So thank you for having joined me. This is Rita Gadi, and this has been your Chronicles.